This is a thing that, this Toe Tie Night has been together around people doing philosophy and who are really deeply steeped into the theory. And I come from a philosophical tradition that's a little bit different. I come from an activist tradition. I've been an activist since I was 16 years old. And for me, philosophy is a guiding point to be an activist, to live, to make the world a better place, and to try to live a self-examined life. And so I apologize to you if a bit of my activist tone comes out in my presentation tonight, when I have the consideration of thinking about Martin Luther King in 1968. And actually the title of the talk is Miles, MLK, and Martyrdom in the 68 Moment in Black Light. The Miles of the presentation is my son Miles, who's 6 years old. And if there's anyone does anyone have kids here? Yeah. Right on. You know that kids will get you woke really quick. I was having a conversation with him the other day, and we're doing the laundry, and he's kind of looked at the laundry machine, and he said to me, "Dad, why is it," well, first of all, he's a very Socratic kid. He says, first question, why is the washing machine a speed queen instead of a speed king? Telling you, woke, right? I did not see that one coming. And then then I was reading him a story, a children's book about Martin Luther King, because he was learning about Martin Luther King, and I was a little concerned about what he was learning, because he had a question. He came home one day and said, "Dad, I learned about Martin Luther King, and he fought really hard, because back in the old days, the white people wouldn't let the black people play. You're old. Did they let you play?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm that old?" Just like, yeah, of course, I did play. But then I read him a story, and at the end of the story, it examined that that Martin Luther King was killed. And he asked a question to me that is still haunting to me, and I think it's haunting at this moment right now. He asked a question, after all that he did, and he is killed, what's the point? And I had to sit down and wrestle with that for like a very long time as a dad. What's the point? And so I wanted to take this investigation in terms of going past this idea of what's the point, to really ask a question that I think Dr. King asks all of us. Not necessarily what the point is, but what is the good? What is the value of doing a community good in the midst of seemingly endless violence that's happening in this society, economic violence, and also the sense of violence that's happening also just physically in our daily lives. When we have with seemingly a ongoing political situation throughout, where many of us, even as adults, are asking ourselves, well, what's the point? And I really had to dig deep inside myself, and I really had to explain and go deeper and think about a different type of Dr. King in this particular moment of Dr. King of all times. Because I think that when you think about Dr. King, certainly the ways in which we frame him these days comes from a very sanitized place, specifically after the inauguration of his birthday as a national holiday. So in essence, in this society right now in the United States, Dr. King kind of plays a role as a black founding father. He has this kind of role as a kind of icon that, is both very, is both a marker of historical significance, but also very safe. There was a recent study, and there's a recent study that actually went into the fact that Dr. King was very unpopular during his last years of his life. He had a 37% approval rating and was considered one of the least popular public figures during his life. But today, Dr. King has a approval rating of over 90%. And there's many different uses of Dr. King's legacy that people use, primarily to illustrate this idea of like a very one-dimensional Dr. King. So my kid comes home with homework, and there's a big picture of Dr. King with a balloon thought on the top of his head, and it says, "I have a dream." And my kid, Miles, says, "Okay, well, I have a dream. I want to play video games." Or, "I have a dream. I want to play soccer." But dreams are fine. But what we don't talk about in terms of what that comes from, in terms of the August March on Washington speech, is that Dr. King had a vision. You know, and he had a vision that he wanted to, that is not only just about young black kids and white kids playing together, but actually challenging the fundamentals in terms of the ugliness of racism. That the fact that when we talk about his "I Have a Dream" speech, we have to get to the point that particular gathering occurred on the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. And that the first thing he said is that we've come to cash a check marked insufficient funds. That Dr. King's vision was connected to economic justice. It was connected to a sense of community. And I think that that's the important aspect of which we lose in terms of the lack of complexity of Dr. King's life. The other part about it too is that we lose something in terms of thinking about Dr. King as a philosopher, someone who actually deals with this idea of the good. Dr. King was very much, in the sense, a hybrid of the charismatic preacher and the scholarly preacher that rolled into one. And he was very unique and revolutionary in that sense, that he had a doctorate, but he also was very much in the spirit of the communicative values of the African American Gospel Church. How much time do I have?
You have a lovely 12 minutes and 29 seconds.
Okay, I better make this real quick. So, and so I think that this is very important to really think about this. But one of the things that Dr. King was actually dealing with in a lot of ways was the fact that his own vision in terms of a beloved community, based upon his own challenges with philosophers such as Friedrich Nietzsche, and that early on in his own development as a theological student at Crozier Theological Seminary, his own philosophical development was that he had a vision of a beloved community, but he felt that it was only could be among those who were under individuals. But it was under his own experience in terms of studying Gandhi and the idea of truth force that he began to develop an idea that the idea of beloved community can cross all values. The second thing is important to understand too, in terms of this question around Dr. King as a complex person, is his role as a father and as a husband. I think that one of the most telling moments in Dr. King's life is when he was getting death threats, and he had a revelation at the kitchen table in which he thought about his wife, he thought about his kids, and he wondered as a leader, could he move forward? And I think that many of us who are activists and many of us who are thinkers have always had this kind of experience at the kitchen table, where we sat down and say, can we move forward? Can we go through this? Is it really worth the trouble? And at that moment, Dr. King stopped and thought and became full of peace and said, I have an understanding that my interconnection and joy is connected with others, and that whatever happens to me does not take away from the collective values and collective joy of others. And I think that this is very important because this is counterintuitive to the way in which empire works, and in which ways we've been taught. In a lot of ways in which this society is run right now. Right now we have a situation where economic inequality in this society is run amok. Where you have, on the one hand, the CEO of Walmart can make 300 times more than the cashier at Walmart. You have a situation where automation is threatening the livelihoods of millions of people. Yes, America first. Did you know America was the first country to develop a department store? Yet it's still the most vulnerable people in the society are the cashiers at these stores. In order for them to live in New York City, a cashier will have to make $30.77 an hour to be able to afford a one-bedroom apartment in New York City. The federal minimum wage right now is $7.25. So you're talking about this deep sense of wealth inequality. And on top of that, you have a political leadership, and I'm sorry to say it, but I'm gonna go there. That's disruptive, delusional, and disordered. Disruptive because within a breath in a tweet can declare that it's okay to close the federal government and threaten the livelihoods and the lives of hundreds of thousands of young people who've immigrated this country for a better life. Delusional when 2 million women or 3 million women march and protest against them, and then he puts out a tweet saying, "Go ahead, women, I'm glad you're celebrating the victories of America." And a general disorder in terms of the one-sidedness of the communication, the refusal to have transparency in terms of the press, the refusal to engage in any type of meaningful dialogue, and be very well aware that this type of work is to do the work of short-circuiting our own sense of well-being and values. And so in the face of that, I think Dr. King's collective idea of joy and the collective idea of beloved community acts as an alternative to that. And I think that Dr. King's vision was even more magnified in 1968, in a period of time when all over the world, poor people and oppressed people were emboldened. 1968, a time when students in France in May, June gathered together with workers and shut down the city of Paris, demanding economic justice. 1968, when the Vietnamese held back the United States Army and demanded their own liberation. 1968, when students in Mexico City took over the universities. This all happened in original poor people's movements when people were emboldened and there was a sense of community and trust. And in that moment, Dr. King himself was calling for a poor people's march to have like civil disobedience in the heart of the Capitol, in the heart of Washington, D.C. Not only for wages, not only for rights, but for dignity. It was his last stand in that first week of April that he went down to Memphis on the behest of the Memphis sanitation workers, 2 of whom had been killed in a truck accident, many of whom had been making $1 an hour. And it was not just a connection around the idea around poverty, but poverty is degradation. How many times have we talked about today that poverty is not just about money, but it's also about degradation? It's also about putting people down, about not feeling good about yourself as a human being. And when you see these pictures of folks in 1968 with the big signs that say, "I'm a man," they're declaring their own humanity. And Dr. King was amplifying that voice. And in the midst of that, there was a counter reaction. That first week of April, 1968, Lyndon Baines Johnson resigns. 2 days later, Dr. King is assassinated. 3 days later, Bobby Hutton, who was a Black Panther member of the Black Panther Party, is shot and killed in Oakland, California. The entire weight of empire falls upon us, and it's supposed to dissipate the movement and destroy us all. However, there's something else that's very important that we know, that in terms of collective joy, and that's the collective responsibility that we have in terms of carrying out a vision. Dr. King's last words were, "I may not get there with you, but we as a people will get to the promised land." It's a vision, a collective responsibility that has us to do this work collectively. And I'm imbued by the fact that today, 50 years later, we still have that collective vision, that in the face of empire, in the face of death, in the face of abuse, we as a people will get to the promised land. So today, when you look at someone like Colin Kaepernick, be very clear about who Colin Kaepernick is as a football player. Football is the most militarized sport there is. It requires time management. You talk about bombs, you talk about the long ball, you talk about blitzes, and the quarterback is the general of that team. When the general of that team takes a knee in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, and then he's ostracized and take away his right to ability to live, his reaction was not, "Woe is me," or "Forget you all, y'all just abandoned me, y'all are watching the Super Bowl now," or bitterness. His reaction was, "We can get there together." And what does he do? He raises $1 million for charities. In the face of empire, he creates a new life. Philando Castile, a victim of police brutality, shot in Minnesota in front of his partner and his child. On tape, on Facebook Live, the police officers let go. In the face of that, in the face of the death of empire, his family says, "We will get there with you." Because we as a people have seen the vision to get to the promised land. And what happens? Philando Castile, who was a cafeteria worker who made sure that every child he met ate. The money that his family got from the settlement went to make sure that every child in Minneapolis, got a hot lunch for free. I would get there with you. So it's in that collective spirit that we live in 1968, and that we don't deal with the idea of martyrdom as being a failure, but be an indication of a different type of life. Because our horizon cannot be set by empire, but we have to have a higher vision of where we want to go as a people. And I think that's the philosophy of Dr. King. And I want to end with this. I happened to be in Germany 2 weeks ago, in Hamburg actually. And if those of you who have been in North Germany or the northern part, know it gets really, really dark. I didn't see the sun for about 2-3 days. And they had a festival called Domschiff, which is a light festival, which is a winter festival, and it was a carnival. I didn't quite understand who would want to ride a roller coaster in sub-degrees in that cold weather. And I didn't understand why would somebody even want to deal with it. But as I walked through that park, I saw hundreds of families laughing and walking around. And I understood that in the midst of the darkness, there's always a light. I'm always imbued by what James Baldwin said, and I think that this is a question around Black life. James Baldwin said about the artist Buford Delaney that Blackness is not the absence of light, it brings light in. And it's in that Black light that allows us to shine and to have a vision beyond the darkness of this particular moment. So I say to you, regardless of any tweet, and regardless of anything that happens, at this moment right now, at 1 o'clock in the morning, let us be imbued with the light that we all have within ourselves to do the work, and to carry ourselves forward, because we can get there with you. Thank you so much.
Wow.